Internal Revenue Service IRS tax news. Taxpayers who aren't eligible for the child tax credit should look into the credit for other dependents. IRS Tax Tip 2021-144, September 29th, 2021. The credit for other dependents, there's a link to that here, is a tax credit available to taxpayers for each of their qualified dependents who can't be claimed for the child tax credit. So when we're thinking about these two credits, you generally think of them in essence together. Thinking about generally dependents, people that could qualify possibly as a dependent, and then first determining whether or not they're going to be a qualifying child that would qualify for the child tax credit, because you get more of a benefit generally if they do. If not, you take the default and see if they would then qualify for the credit for other dependents. Now note that if you're thinking back to the past and you think about dependents, you might be saying, hey, wasn't there like an exemption or something we used to get that was kind of like a benefit for dependents? That was a few years ago that we had that. They kind of removed that to simplify the code, but in removing it then, they took away kind of like a benefit for the dependents, and then they kind of replaced it with the child tax credit, which was always there, but you get a benefit for the child tax credit, and then if you don't get a benefit for the child tax credit, you got this other dependents. Now you might then be saying, well, do I get a prepayment for the other dependents like I do for the child tax credit? And no, you don't. So you'd have to wait till you file the tax return, and then you might get a benefit for the dependent. So the maximum credit amount is $500 for each dependent who meets certain conditions. These include the dependent who are age 17 or older, dependents who have, and that generally would mean, if they're 17 or older, if they're younger than 17 in essence, and they are a dependent, then you'd want to be looking into whether or not they qualify for the child tax credit. If they're older than 17, then they may be more likely to qualify for the credit for other dependents. Dependents who have individual taxpayer identification numbers, so they got to have an ID in essence. Dependent parents or other qualifying relatives supported by the taxpayer, so dependent parents. Dependents living with the taxpayers who aren't related to the taxpayer. So the credit begins to phase out when the taxpayer's income is more than $200,000. This phase out begins for married couples filing a joint tax return at $400,000. A taxpayer can claim this credit if they claim the person as a dependent on the taxpayer's return. So typically they're going to have to be claimed, as a dependent. They qualify for a dependent, therefore, to claim them as a dependent. They cannot use the dependent to claim the child tax credit or additional child tax credit. So you got to take one or the other. So the question then again would be, do they qualify for the child tax credit? If not, then you're looking at this other credit. The dependent is a U.S. citizen, national, or resident alien. So taxpayers can claim the credit for other dependents in addition to the child and dependent care credit. There's a link to that here. And the earned income tax credit. There's a link to that here as well. Taxpayers can use the instructions for Form 8812. There's a link to that here to help them determine if they can claim the credit for other dependents. More information can be found at the links below, which are Whom May I Claim as a Dependent, Publication 501, Exemptions, Standard Deductions, and Filing Information. There's links to those items here. There'll be a link to this in the description.